Hi, this is Sudeep, and I welcome you back to this wonderful journey of learning structure analysis with STAAD.Pro. We have now completed discussions on the property and material modeling. Before going into modeling for support, let us, in this session, get into a discussion about the beta angles once again, about non-zero beta angles. But before we go further, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button to join us in this wonderful journey of learning structure analysis with STAAD.Pro. Now, before we dive deep into this topic, it would be important that you have grasped the concepts that we had discussed previously. So I'd recommend these 3 consecutive sessions that you would need to watch to make a sense of what I'm speaking on today. Session number 35 discusses about understanding the local axis system in STAAD.Pro. Session number 36, understanding the STAAD.Pro beta angle 0 configuration part 1, and session number 37, which is part 2 of understanding the STAAD.Pro beta's angle 0 configuration. You can access session number 35 by clicking on the link which is appearing on the top right of the screen right now. Further, you would also need to have a look at session number 38 and 39, which discusses on the orientation of the concrete sections in STAAD.Pro with respect to the local axis system. Session number 38 can be accessed from the link that is appearing on the top right of the screen right now. And finally, you'd also need to have a look at sessions 41 and 42, which discusses the orientation of steel sections with respect to the local axis system. Session number 41 can be accessed by clicking on the screen that is appearing on the screen right now. Okay, now let's consider the case of this frame where we would want to assign ISMB 600 section to the column members, this and this. However, if we look at the plan of the frame model, the orientation of the sections in the column members should be like this, and the dotted lines represents the beam that connects the 2 column members. Okay, now let us go into the section database from the properties whole structure box and get ISMB 600 section into the properties whole structure box. You know how to find the ISMB 600 sections by now. Going into the Indian database, so I select ISMB 600, click on the add button and bring it in the properties whole structure box. Now let us use the use cursor to assign method and assign the ISMB 600 section to both the columns. Now, in order to complete the property modeling of the whole model, let us define a concrete section of depth 0.4 meters and width 0.25 meters and assign it to the beam in the model. So we have created this section, added the section to the properties whole structure box, and using the use cursor to assign method, we assign the rectangular concrete section to the beam of this frame model. Now, if we go and switch on the sections outline view for the sections that has been assigned to the model, we see that both the column sections have their ISMB 600 oriented in a similar way. So if we actually select the 2 column members and view only these 2 members, and if we go and view this frame model, which has only the column members as in the view for now from the top, we will see that both the ISMB 600 are oriented in the same direction. And the reason why the columns are oriented similarly is because of the default beta 0 configuration of the local axis system and how the ISMB 600 section is oriented about the local axis system. So if we actually go back to our isometric view and if we switch on the local axis orientation view, we can see that the local axis orientation with the local x-axis pointing from the bottom node to the top node in both the columns has exactly the same orientation, and this is the beta 0 configuration, the default beta 0 configuration for this member. And we had assigned the ISMB 600, which has a definite way of being oriented around the global axis system. Now, since the local axis system orientation is the same, the orientation of ISMB 600 section, which is oriented about the local axis system, is also the same. But our field configuration of the section of the columns are like this, and if we cannot change the configuration of the section of one of the column members in our STAAD.Pro model to correspond to what the structure would be actually like in the field condition, we will end up with completely different analysis result than that would apply realistically. So we would need to ensure that our modeling is correct and correspond to what the structure is planned to be in the field condition. But how do we do that? One thing that we understand is that we would need to change the direction of the local axis system from what we see on the screen, which is the default or the beta angle 0 configuration, to this configuration. This means that we would need to rotate the local y and local z axis by 90 degrees in the anti-clockwise direction from the default beta 0 configuration. But how can we achieve this in STAAD.Pro? Well, the non-zero beta angle specification is what would help us to achieve this in STAAD.Pro. Let us look into this concept further. Now let us consider this representation of the ISMB 600 section in its default beta angle 0 configuration. In this case, the local x-axis is coming out of the page towards you, and hence we have the beta 0 default configuration of the local y and the local z-axis as you see on the screen. As you know by now, the red axis represents the local y-axis and the green axis represents the local z-axis. Now, if we can rotate the local y and local z-axis from its default position in the anticlockwise direction by 90 degrees, we get the required configuration. So we rotate that in the anticlockwise direction by 90 degrees. And this is the default configuration that we would require for the section of one of the column members. On the other hand, we would also achieve a satisfactory configuration if we rotate the section in the clockwise direction instead of in the anticlockwise direction by 90 degrees. That is, so clockwise rotation of 90 degrees, like this. Now, from the structural analysis standpoint, both of these configurations are acceptable. The only difference that we get is in the positive directions of the local y and the local z axis. However, in this case, it is the beta minus 90 degree configuration or the beta plus 270 degree configuration, because if we had rotated this section from the default beta 0 configuration in the anticlockwise direction by 270 degrees, we would have achieved the same configuration that we would have achieved by rotating it in the clockwise direction by 90 degrees. But how do we define a positive beta angle versus a negative beta angle? The right hand thumb rule again helps us to define the sign convention of the beta angles. So if the thumb is an indication of the positive direction of the local x-axis, the direction of the curl of the fingers would indicate the positive rotation of the beta angle, and the opposite would thus indicate the negative rotation of the beta angle. In our case, the local axis system is coming out of the page towards us. So we would need to give it a rotation of plus 90 degrees to get the required configuration as shown on the screen. So let us go back to our frame model where we intend to define a beta angle of 90 degrees for this column member. So, but before we do this, let us switch on the local axis orientation by pressing Shift plus O, and then we double click on this particular member because we intend to change the beta angle of this particular member. Now we can see that double clicking on that member brings up the member query box, and under the additional info category we can see that the beta angle has been specified as 0 degrees. Now, so we click on this change beta button to change the beta angle, and we specify the beta angles as 90 degrees. Now, one thing, keep an eye on this particular column, the local axis orientation, with the local y-axis pointing parallel to the global x, and local z is pointing parallel to the global z. Now, as soon as I click on OK, just note how the local axis orientation would change with, and which along with it would also change the section orientation in the model. So if I click on OK, keep an eye on the local axis orientation of that particular member. Now clicking on OK, you could see that how the local axis orientation has now changed. Now if we switch on the sections outline view, so go to structure diagrams and switch on section outlines, we can see that the column has its section oriented in the directions that we want. So we can actually create a view to view only these columns and not the beam. So we click on new view and display it in the active view. Now if we look at this view from the top, we would see that the sections are now oriented exactly as we had wanted. So what did we do? Again, we had specified a beta angle of 90 degrees to this particular member. I hope you have enjoyed the concept of specifying non-zero beta angles. If you have liked the session today, please do hit the like button. If you have any questions, please ask them in the comment section below. I hope to see you in the next session next week. Till then, bye-bye.